The night Soul swallowed Jennifer whole. She had been 22 years old, barefoot on a rain-slicked street, and carrying nothing but a single suitcase with a broken zipper and a scholarship letter from Yonsei University that had turned out to be fraudulent. She had come from Lagos with dreams stitched into the lining of her coat, dreams her mother had sewn there with her own prayers, whispering, "You will be the one, Jennifer. You will be the one who makes it." And now those dreams were dissolving in the Korean rain, bleeding into the gutters of Itaewon like cheap ink. She didn't see the black SUV until it had already stopped in front of her. She didn't see him until the window rolled down. Hu Yi-won was 27 years old the first time he looked at Jennifer Adiz Akafer, and every single person in his organization, from the lowest street runner to his most senior lieutenant, would later say that was the night their boss lost his mind. He didn't say anything at first. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at something he recognizes but cannot name, the way you look at a face from a dream. Dark eyes beneath the shadow of a perfectly tailored hood, a jaw carved like punishment. His hands rested on the edge of the window, and Jennifer noticed his knuckles, scarred, deliberate, the hands of a man who had decided long ago that the world would bend to him or break. "You're going to catch pneumonia," he said, in English, perfectly. Jennifer lifted her chin. She had been raised by a woman who taught her that a straight spine was the only armor a black girl could always afford. "I didn't ask for your medical opinion." Something shifted in his face, a crack in marble, almost a smile. "Get in the car." "I don't get into cars with strangers." "In this part of Seoul," Hu said quietly, "I am not a stranger. I own this street." She should have walked away. Every instinct her mother had carefully cultivated over 22 years of raising a daughter in a world that underestimated her screamed, "Walk away, Jennifer." But the rain was getting heavier. Her suitcase zipper had finally surrendered completely, and there was something in his eyes, something that looked terrifyingly, inexplicably, like recognition. She got in the car. That was how it began, not with roses, not with candlelight, with rain and a broken suitcase and a man whose name she wouldn't learn for another 3 hours. Hu Yi-won, the Jade Dragon. At 27, he was already the youngest boss the Yongsan Syndicate had seen in 4 decades. His father had built the organization from scratch, back rooms and betting slips, protection money and patience. His grandfather had died for it, and Hu had inherited it all at 23, after his father suffered a stroke that left the great Hu Sung-jin staring at a wall in a Gangnam hospital room, his empire unraveling at the edges. Hu had pulled every thread back into place with bare hands. He was not a good man. He would tell you that himself, directly, without apology or performance. He ran gambling operations across 3 districts. He had 6 legitimate businesses that existed for the sole purpose of being illegitimate. His name made prosecutors nervous and rivals disappear. He had never been to prison because the people who could put him there were either on his payroll or too afraid to sign their name to anything that had his on it. He was not a good man. But the night he found Jennifer Akafer standing in the rain on his street, something happened to him that all his power and ruthlessness had not prepared him for. He felt guilty. Not for who he was, who had buried guilt about that long ago in a grave he'd dug himself. He felt guilty because she was standing in the rain in his city, in his territory, and she was clearly brilliant and clearly cheated and clearly refusing to cry about it, and the world had handed her a fraudulent letter and a broken suitcase and expected her to fold. Jennifer Akafer did not fold. He was fascinated. She stayed in one of his properties that first night, a clean, spare apartment above a restaurant he owned in Mapogu. She didn't thank him. She demanded the Wi-Fi password, found the contact information for the Nigerian embassy in Seoul, and had sent 4 emails before she'd even taken off her wet coat. Hu stood in the doorway and watched her work, and felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child sitting beside his mother before she left, before she decided that loving the son of a crime lord was a weight she couldn't carry. He felt home. He left before she could ask him to. He came back the next morning with breakfast and a manila folder. Inside the folder was the name of the man who had sold Jennifer the fraudulent scholarship, a low-level con artist operating out of a fake education consultancy in Victoria Island, Lagos, who had taken her family's savings along with her future. There was also a bank transfer confirmation. The full amount. Returned. Jennifer stared at the folder, then she looked up at him. "How did you find this?" "I told you," Hu said simply, setting the food on the table. "I own this street. In Seoul, that means I know things." "You don't own Lagos." "No," he met her eyes, "but I know people who do." A long silence stretched between them, the kind that isn't empty but full, so full it has weight and texture, and the particular electricity of two people recognizing that they are standing at the edge of something enormous. "Why?" Jennifer asked, just that, why? Hu looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the most honest thing he had perhaps ever said to another human being. "Because it was wrong, and I had the power to fix it, and for once," he paused, something flickering behind those dark eyes, "I wanted to use that power for something that wasn't ugly." Jennifer Ackafer, who had survived a fraudulent scholarship, a Lagos conman, a Seoul rainstorm, and 22 years of a world that kept telling her she was too much and not enough simultaneously, felt her carefully constructed armor develop its very first crack. She didn't smile, not yet. But she pushed one of the breakfast containers toward him and said, "Sit down, then. If you paid for it, you might as well eat it." And Hu Yiwon, the Jade Dragon, the most feared name in Yongsan, sat down. They were married 8 months later. The ceremony was small by syndicate standards, which still meant 60 armed men in suits standing at the perimeter of a private venue in Hanamdong. Jennifer wore gold. Her mother flew in from Lagos and cried for 4 hours straight, half from joy, half from a terror she was too proud to fully name. Whose father watched from a wheelchair, his eyes sharp even if his body had surrendered, and he studied Jennifer with the calculating gaze of a man who had spent his life measuring people for their worth. Whatever he measured in Jennifer Ackafer, he kept to himself. But he nodded, once, and in Hu's world that was everything. The first year was almost ordinary. Almost. Jennifer enrolled in a legitimate program at Yonsei, international business, and attacked it with the focused fury of a woman who had already paid too high a price for her education to waste a single lecture. Hu moved between his worlds, the glass and steel boardrooms of his legitimate businesses by day, the darker rooms by night, and came home to a wife who never asked him where he'd been but always knew. Jennifer was sharp, terrifyingly, beautifully sharp. She could read a room the way Hu read a threat, instantly, completely, with an accuracy that unnerved people who underestimated her. His lieutenants underestimated her exactly once. After that, they called her Madam Dragon, not to her face, but she knew everything. It was a good year. Then came the second year, and the third, and the quiet, growing weight of absence, the absence that doesn't announce itself loudly, but settles into the corners of a marriage like cold air through old walls. No children. In Hu's world, heirs were not sentiment. They were strategy. The syndicate needed continuity. His father asked about it carefully, then less carefully, then not carefully at all. His senior lieutenant, Park Di-young, a hard-faced man who had served the Hu family for 20 years and trusted Jennifer approximately as far as he could throw the Han River, began making comments. Small ones, targeted ones, the kind designed to find a bruise and press. "Perhaps the problem is compatibility," Park said once, in a meeting Jennifer was not supposed to overhear. She heard. She said nothing. She filed it. Jennifer Ackafer had learned very young that the most dangerous response was sometimes no response at all, just remembering. Hu told Park to mind his tongue. He meant it. Park smiled and agreed and meant nothing. By year 5, the doctors had given them a word. A clinical, cold, efficient word that was supposed to explain everything, and explained nothing about the grief that followed Jennifer into every room, that sat at their dinner table between them like an uninvited guest. Neither of them could bring themselves to acknowledge directly. Unexplained infertility. Jennifer was 27. She sat in the doctor's office in Sinchon and looked at the wall and thought about her mother's prayers and wondered if God had a filing system where some prayers just got lost. who held her hand in the taxi home. He didn't say anything. He was not a man who reached for words in difficult moments. He reached for action, for solutions, for the next move. But this had no next move. And so he held her hand, and Jennifer looked out the window at Seoul passing by, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. What does this mean for us? It meant 5 more years of trying. 5 more years of hope and disappointment cycling through their marriage like seasons. 5 years of Jennifer watching Hu's face when he thought she couldn't see, watching him calculate, watching him contain, watching him slowly begin to build a wall around whatever it was he felt. She built one too. That was the mistake. That was where the damage started, not in the absence of children, but in the silence they built around the absence. 2 people who were each too strong, too proud, too practiced at surviving alone, building walls to protect each other from pain and accidentally building walls between each other instead. By year 8, they were living in the same house like 2 sovereign nations, sharing a border. By year 9, Hu's father died. And Park Ji-young started talking about the future of the syndicate. And Jennifer found a letter she was never supposed to find. And everything, every single carefully constructed thing, began to fall apart. The letter was not hidden well enough. That was the thing Jennifer would turn over in her mind for months afterward. Not the contents of the letter, not the betrayal it represented, not even the cold, surgical precision with which her life had been dismantled around her without her knowledge. What she would keep returning to, in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep refused her, was the fact that it had been left in the inside pocket of Hu's suit jacket. The gray one. The one he knew she sent to the dry cleaner every 3rd Thursday. Either he had forgotten, or some part of him had wanted her to find it. She never decided which possibility was worse. The letter was from Park Ji-young, dated 4 months earlier. Written in Korean, which Park had always conducted business in when he wanted to exclude Jennifer from a room without technically removing her from it. But Jennifer had been married to a Korean crime lord for 9 years. She had sat through enough meetings, absorbed enough language, survived enough calculated exclusions, that her Korean, while never perfect, was functional enough for the important things. And this was important. The letter was not long. Park was not a man who believed in wasting words. It contained, in essence, 3 things. First, a summary of discussions that had apparently been taking place for months within the syndicate's senior circle, discussions about legacy, continuity, and the dangerous optics of a boss with no heir. Second, a recommendation. And third, the part that made Jennifer's hands go very still on the paper, a name. Kim Soo-yeon, 24 years old. The youngest daughter of the Kim family in Busan, a family whose alliance with the Yongsan syndicate would double their territory, legitimize 3 of their most vulnerable business operations, and solve, in one elegant arrangement, every problem that Park Ji-young believed Jennifer Ockhafer's existence had created. The recommendation was this: divorce the African woman. It has been 10 years. The marriage has produced nothing. The men are beginning to talk, and talk becomes doubt, and doubt becomes weakness. We cannot afford weakness. Kim Soo-yeon will give you an heir. Kim Soo-yeon will give you Busan. End it cleanly. End it now. Jennifer read it twice. Then she folded it exactly as she had found it, replaced it in the pocket of the gray suit, and hung the suit back in the closet. She went to the kitchen and made tea. She sat at the counter of the home she had built over 9 years. The home with the view of the Han River that she had argued Hu into buying because she said the water would calm him, and she had been right, and she drank her tea, and she looked at the river, and she made a decision. She would not cry, not yet, not here, not in this kitchen with his coffee still in the machine and his reading glasses folded on the counter and 9 years of herself soaked into the walls. She would not give this house her tears. She did not confront Hu that night, or the next. She waited with the particular devastating patience of a woman who had learned that timing was everything, and she watched him. She watched for the signs of a man who had already made a decision and was working up to delivering it. She had interrogated enough of his moods over 9 years to read him the way other people read weather. She saw it on the 11th day. He came home later than usual. He was dressed too carefully for a regular night. He had that quality he got when he was preparing for something difficult, a stillness, a contained tension, like a blade that has already decided where it's going to fall. He sat across from her at the dinner table, and she watched him organize his words behind his eyes, and she thought, with a grief so large it had stopped feeling like grief and started feeling like geography, like something she simply lived inside of. So Park 1. After everything, Park 1. Jennifer. His voice was careful, exactly as careful as she had known it would be. I already know, she said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Hu's jaw tightened, just slightly. How long? 11 days. He closed his eyes. Something crossed his face, something that in another life, in a marriage where two people hadn't slowly built walls around their individual grief until the walls became the marriage, might have been the beginning of a real conversation. An honest one. The kind that could have saved them. But they had both forgotten how to have those. Somewhere between year 5 and year 7, they had lost the language for honesty with each other, and now they were standing on opposite sides of a distance they had constructed themselves and calling it fate. Suyeon, he started. Don't, Jennifer's voice was quiet, absolute. Don't say her name in this house. He stopped. I will sign whatever you need me to sign, Jennifer said. She looked at him steadily, the straight spine her mother had given her, the armor that had never once failed her, holding now when everything else was collapsing. I will not make this ugly. I will not embarrass you or the syndicate. I will leave cleanly. She paused. That's what Park wants, isn't it, clean? This is not about Park. Who, just his name. But the way she said it, the weight of 9 years and 2 syllables, stopped him completely. Don't lie to me. You have never lied to me. Please don't start now. I couldn't bear it. The longest pause of their marriage stretched between them. I'm sorry, he said finally, and she believed him. That was perhaps the most painful part. She believed completely that he was sorry. Sorry was simply not enough to rebuild what silence and grief and 10 years of unspoken things had hollowed out. I know, she said. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in March, which Jennifer always thought was a deeply unremarkable day for a life to be divided into before and after. She signed her name in a lawyer's office in Gangnam with Hu sitting across the table, looking like a man attending his own sentencing, and Park Ji-young standing near the window with the carefully neutral expression of a man who was trying not to look satisfied and failing. Jennifer looked at Park once, directly, as she capped her pen. He looked away first. She noted that, filed it, kept it. Her settlement was generous. Hu had insisted on that, overriding Park's initial figure with something that made even the lawyers uncomfortable. The apartment in Mapogu where they had first lived. A sum of money that meant Jennifer Okafor would never need anything from anyone for the rest of her life. And a single condition that Jennifer herself had added, quietly, through her own lawyer, in language so carefully buried in the legal document that Park had missed it entirely on his review. All future contact, to be initiated solely at the discretion of the first party. Her discretion, her terms, her timeline. She walked out of the lawyer's office into March sunlight, and she got into a cab and she gave the driver an address, not the Mapogu apartment. A different address, one nobody in Hu's world knew about. And then, finally, alone in the back of a Seoul taxi, with the city sliding past the windows, Jennifer Adiz Okafor allowed herself to cry. Not for long, she was her mother's daughter. But long enough. She had known for 6 weeks. That was the thing, the extraordinary, terrifying, almost cosmically ironic thing, that Jennifer had been carrying like a live wire through every conversation, every signed document, every careful negotiation of her own departure. She had known for 6 weeks before the divorce was finalized, had held the information inside her chest like something fragile and explosive simultaneously, something that could either save everything or destroy what little remained. She had chosen silence, and she would spend 3 years questioning that choice. The test had been a Thursday morning in February. She had taken it alone in the bathroom of the Mapogu apartment, sitting on the cold tile floor, and when the result appeared, she had simply stared at it for a very long time. Her mind, that precise, analytical, relentlessly logical mind that had gotten her through fraudulent scholarships and crime lord in-laws and a decade inside a world that had never quite been built for her, went completely, perfectly still. 10 years, she thought. 10 years and now. Now. She had thought about telling him, had stood outside his study door with the test in her hand on 2 separate occasions, had constructed the conversation in her head, the words, his reaction, the way those dark eyes would change. She knew him well enough, even then, even across all that distance they had built, to know that this would change things. This would stop the machinery that Park had set in motion. And that was precisely why she didn't. Because she didn't want to be the reason who stayed. She didn't want a marriage rebuilt on obligation and relief, and the syndicate's need for an heir. She didn't want her children. She knew already with a fierce, animal certainty that they were hers completely, to grow up inside a negotiation. To grow up as peace treaties rather than people. She wanted better for them. So she signed the papers, and she walked into the sole March sunshine, and she cried in the taxi, and then she stopped. She went to London. It made sense practically. She had professional connections there from her years building her own consulting business in Seoul, a network of corporate clients who valued her expertise in Asian market entry strategy and didn't ask questions about the famous Korean surname she had briefly carried. London was neutral. London was enormous enough to disappear into. London had a Yoruba community that would fold her back into a familiar warmth she had been quietly starving for. She found a flat in Peckham, wide windows, good light, the sound of multiple languages rising from the street below like music, and she set it up with the focused efficiency of a woman who had survived worse and built better, and she prepared. Her mother came from Lagos the moment Jennifer told her. Flew in with 2 enormous suitcases, a quantity of pepper soup ingredients that cleared customs by the grace of God and creative packaging, and a face arranged in an expression of complex emotion that Jennifer recognized as the particular combination of "I told you so" and "my darling, I am so sorry" that only a mother could hold simultaneously. She didn't say either. She just held Jennifer for a long time in the arrivals hall at Heathrow, and Jennifer, who was 30 weeks pregnant and exhausted and trying very hard to be strong, held her back and let herself, just briefly, be somebody's child again. The twins arrived on a Thursday evening in August. Twin girls, perfect, furious, extraordinary, they announced themselves to the world with a simultaneous outrage that made the midwife laugh and Jennifer cry and her mother pray in 3 languages at once. They were born 4 minutes apart. The elder one, Jennifer, named her Zara, came first with her eyes already open, looking around the room with an expression of profound assessment, as if cataloging everything and finding it acceptable. The younger, Amara, arrived second, quieter, with a stillness that was somehow more alarming than noise. Jennifer held them both, one in each arm, in the white bright hospital room, and looked at their faces, and felt the world tilt completely on its axis. Because there, on the faces of her daughters, in the particular sharp architecture of their cheekbones, in the precise line of their tiny brows, were whose eyes? Not similar, not reminiscent. His, dark and deep and carrying that quality she had recognized from the very first night in the rain, that look of knowing something, of seeing through things, of a stillness that was not emptiness but its opposite. Jennifer looked at her daughters and saw her husband's eyes looking back at her. Former husband, she corrected herself. And then, because she was alone and they were so beautiful, and it was all so enormous and she was so tired, she stopped correcting herself and just looked at them until the looking became the only thing in the world. 3 years passed. Zara and Amara Akafer grew into themselves with a speed that Jennifer found both miraculous and slightly alarming. At 6 months, they were holding eye contact with the considered intensity of tiny boardroom executives. At 18 months, they had developed a nonverbal communication system between themselves that operated at a frequency Jennifer was not entirely sure she was invited to access. By 3 years old, Zara was disassembling and correctly reassembling her toys for the mechanical satisfaction of understanding how things worked, and Amara was collecting people, watching them, studying them, remembering everything about them with the particular precision of someone cataloging allies. They were their mother's daughters. She poured everything into them, her intelligence, her warmth, her work ethic, her laughter, her language, her culture, her prayers, her mother's pepper soup recipe, her father's stories, Lagos and London, and everything she had loved about Seoul folded into bedtime routines and weekend markets, and a life that was smaller than the one she had left but richer in every way that mattered. But they were also someone else's daughters. And London, it turned out, was not quite far enough to keep that fact from becoming complicated. Because Park Ji-young, who had won his quiet war and installed Kim Soo-yeon in the Yongsan Syndicate's social architecture, had recently discovered something that threatened to unravel everything he had so carefully arranged. He had found out about the twins,